Welcome to Moonlit Stories. Tonight, we are going somewhere quiet, somewhere far from bright rooms, busy streets, and the small worries that gather at the edge of the day. Tonight, we are traveling to a little harbor village on the northern coast, where the snow falls slowly over dark water, where warm windows glow against the night, and where an old lighthouse is said to appear only when the moon is full. So, make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest. And let the room around you grow still. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. Nothing you need to carry. Only this story, this quiet night, and the silver path of moonlight waiting on the sea. The village was called Greyhaven. It was not the sort of place people found by accident. The road that led there curled through pine woods, crossed 3 narrow stone bridges, and ended at a small harbor where fishing boats slept beneath white blankets of snow. By day, Greyhaven was simple and weathered. Its cottages leaned toward the water, their roofs dark with age, their chimneys breathing soft lines of smoke into the winter air. Nets dried on old wooden posts, ropes coiled beside the pier, small boats rested against their moorings with the patient stillness of animals that had worked hard and were now allowed to sleep. But by night, especially on nights when the moon was full, the village seemed to belong to a different world. The snow became silver, the sea became black glass, and every window looked like a lantern set gently against the dark. You arrived just after dusk, when the last blue light was leaving the sky. The bus that brought you there had followed the coastal road for almost an hour, its headlights moving through the trees, its windows dimmed by frost. You would watch the forest pass in quiet layers, black trunks, soft branches, pale snow, and then, every now and then, a sudden opening where the sea appeared far below, dark and calm beneath the first stars. The driver had said very little. In fact, he had only spoken once, when the bus turned down the final road toward the harbor. Greyhaven, he said, as if the name itself was enough. And perhaps it was, because when you stepped down onto the snowy road and heard the soft, closing sigh of the bus doors behind you, the village seemed to be waiting. No cars moved along the street. No voices rose from the harbor. Only snow falling slowly and the distant hush of water against stone. A small wooden sign swung in the wind beside the road. Greyhaven Harbor. Population fewer in winter. You smiled at that, though you were not sure why. It felt like the sort of joke a village made only to itself. Ahead, at the foot of the hill, a line of cottages curved around the harbor. Their windows glowed in soft shades of amber and honey. Smoke lifted from chimneys and drifted into the dark. At the end of the main street stood the Harbor Inn, a 3-story building with blue shutters, a slate roof, and a sign painted with a silver anchor and a crescent moon. The sign read, "The Turning Tide." A small bell rang above the door as you stepped inside. The room was warm, not bright exactly, just warm. There was a fire glowing in a stone hearth, a kettle breathing gently on the stove, and the smell of cedar wood, wool blankets, and bread cooling beneath a clean white cloth. A few old lamps stood on side tables. Their shades were the color of cream. The floorboards had been worn smooth by many winters of boots and salt and snow. Behind the counter stood an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pinned at the back of her neck. She looked up from a book of tide charts and smiled. "You came on a moon night," she said. Her voice was quiet, as if every sound in Greyhaven had learned not to disturb the snow. You smiled back and brushed a few flakes from your coat. "I didn't know there was such a thing." "Oh," she said, reaching for a brass key from the wall behind her. "There is, and tonight is one of the finest." She placed the key in your palm. It was heavy and old, with the number 7 etched into a small wooden tag. Room 7 was at the top of the stairs, beneath the sloping roof, with a round window facing the sea. But before you could ask about it, the innkeeper nodded toward the window beside the hearth. Beyond the glass, the harbor rested in darkness. The boats shifted gently. The moon rose higher, and far across the water, where the cliff met the sky, there was nothing but snow and shadow. "At midnight," she said, "look toward the headland." You followed her gaze. "The old lighthouse?" you asked. The innkeeper's smile softened. "There hasn't been a lighthouse there for nearly 80 years. The fire gave a small, sleepy crackle. Outside, snow drifted past the window in slow, weightless pieces. "But some nights," she continued, "when the moon is clear and the sea is calm, people say they see it again. A tower of white stone, a golden lamp, a path of light across the water." She looked down at the tide chart, then back at you. "And if the lamp turns towards you, it means the lighthouse has a story to tell." You did not know what to say to that. There are some stories that ask to be believed, and others that ask only to be carried for a while, like a warm cup held between cold hands. This felt like the second kind. So you thanked her, took the key, and climbed the narrow stairs. Room 7 was small and peaceful. There was a narrow bed under a wool blanket, a wooden chair beside the window, and a little writing desk with a jar of dried lavender placed carefully in the corner. A folded quilt rested at the foot of the bed. A blue ceramic pitcher stood on the washstand. The round window had a deep sill, wide enough to sit in, and through it you could see the harbour below. You changed into warm clothes, poured a cup of tea from the tray beside the bed, and sat by the window. For a while, nothing happened, and that was pleasant. The village settled, the snow continued. The harbour lamps blinked softly along the pier. You could hear the low hush of the sea moving in and out like a long, slow breath. In and out, in and out. A sound so steady it seemed to smooth the edges of your thoughts. A clock somewhere downstairs gave 11 quiet chimes. Then the inn grew still. A footstep crossed the hall and faded. A door closed softly. The fire below shifted once, then became only a low glow beneath the floorboards. At 11:30, the moon rose above the clouds. At 11:45, the snow stopped. And at midnight, a light appeared on the headland. It began as a single golden point, small, faint, almost easy to mistake for a star fallen too low. Then the darkness around it shifted, and beneath the light you saw the pale shape of a tower. Stone by stone, window by window, the lighthouse emerged from the night. It stood where no lighthouse should have been, tall and quiet, white as bone, its lantern room glowing with a warm, patient flame. Then the beam turned, slowly, slowly, across the sleeping water, across the snow-covered boats, across the round window of room 7. And for one peaceful moment, the whole room filled with gold. You did not feel afraid. That was the strange thing. You felt invited. Chapter 1. The Moonlit Path. You stood at the window for several minutes, watching the light move. The beam swept out over the sea, then across the harbour, then up along the snowy cliffs. It moved with the old rhythm of every lighthouse that had ever kept watch over black water and uncertain weather. Turn, glow, fade. Turn, glow, fade. In the village, no one seemed to wake. No curtains opened, no dogs barked. The boats did not stir, except for their usual gentle rocking in the tide. It was as if Greyhaven had seen this before and had decided long ago that some wonders should be left undisturbed. On the writing desk, beside the jar of lavender, something glimmered. It had not been there a moment before. You crossed the room and found a small folded card, thick as watercolor paper, sealed with a dot of silver wax. Pressed into the wax was the shape of a lighthouse beam. You opened it carefully. Inside, in neat blue ink, were 4 words. Come while the tide sleeps. For a while, you simply looked at the words. Then you looked back through the window. The lighthouse stood on the headland, steady and bright, its lamp turning slowly beneath the moon. You could have stayed in the room. You could have climbed into bed, pulled the quilt to your shoulders, and told yourself that some mysteries are best enjoyed from a safe distance. But the night outside did not feel dangerous. It felt hushed, expectant, as if the snow, the moon, and the sea had all lowered their voices to make room for one more story. So you put on your coat, you wrapped a scarf around your neck, you slipped the brass key into your pocket, and stepped quietly into the hall. The inn was asleep. A low lamp burned at the top of the stairs. Below, the common room was dim, the fire reduced to a bed of red coals. The kettle had gone silent. The tide charts on the counter lay open, their inked lines resembling maps of dreams. The front door opened without a sound. Outside, the cold met you gently, not sharply, the way winter sometimes does, but softly, as if the air itself were wrapped in wool. The village street curved down toward the harbor, Snow lay smooth over the rooftops, the steps, the closed market stalls, the garden walls, and the narrow lanes between cottages. The moonlight made everything clear without making it bright. You walked slowly, your boots pressed into the snow with a quiet crunch. A row of lanterns glowed along the harbor wall. Their flames were small and steady behind frosted glass. Fishing nets hung from wooden beams, stiff with ice. A blue boat named Maribel rested beside the pier, her ropes dark and wet, her deck silvered by moonlight. Far ahead, the lighthouse beam crossed the cliffs again. For one moment, the path appeared. It began beyond the last cottage, where a narrow track climbed toward the headland. In daylight, it might have looked ordinary, a footpath through wind-bent grass and low stone walls. But under the full moon, it shone faintly, as if the snow upon it had remembered every footstep ever taken there. You passed the bakery, where tomorrow's bread waited in covered baskets. You passed the post office, with its red door and brass slot. You passed a little shop window filled with candles, each one unlit, but glowing faintly anyway, as if the moon had lent them some of its light. At the edge of the village, a black cat sat on a stone wall and watched you with calm green eyes. "Good evening," you whispered. The cat blinked once, as if accepting the greeting. Then it leapt down into the snow and walked ahead of you for a short distance, tail lifted, paws silent. At the beginning of the path, it stopped, looked back once, and then disappeared between two juniper bushes. You were alone again, or perhaps not alone exactly. The night was full of small presences, the soft sound of water below, the sigh of pine branches above, the faint creak of a sign behind you, the distant turn of the lighthouse lamp. Each sound had space around it. Nothing crowded anything else. One step, then another, then another. The path rose gently. As you climbed, the village became smaller behind you. The inn's windows glowed warmly. The harbour curved like a dark bowl below. The boats rested within it like folded paper. At the first bend in the path, you stopped to catch your breath. The sea stretched out to the horizon, where the moonlight lay in a long silver road across the water. For a moment, you imagined walking that road, not with effort, not with fear, just stepping softly from one shining ripple to another, following the light wherever it wished to take you. The card in your pocket seemed to grow warm. "Come while the tide sleeps," you continued. The cliffs were lined with winter grass, bent low by many years of wind. Now, with the air so still, every blade held its own line of frost. Low stone walls crossed the hill in patient rows. A few sheep slept in the lee of a shed, round and quiet beneath the moon. Halfway up the path, you came to an old iron gate. It should have been rusted shut. It looked as if it had not been opened in decades. But when you touched it, the latch lifted easily. The gate swung inward. Beyond it, the path became smoother. The snow thinned, and the lighthouse stood at the top of the headland, waiting. It was more beautiful up close. The tower rose from a base of pale stone blocks, each one clean and whole, as if the building had not been gone for 80 years, but had simply stepped away for a moment and returned. A narrow door stood at the foot of the tower, painted dark blue. Above it hung a small lantern. Its flame burned gold. The windows climbing the side of the tower were round and thick, set deep into the stone. The lantern room at the top was made of glass and iron, and inside it the great lens turned slowly, catching the flame, shaping it, sending it out across the sea. You stood before the door and listened. There was the ocean. There was the soft wind. There was the faint hum of the lamp above. And beneath those sounds, almost too quiet to hear, there was music. Not a song exactly, more like the memory of one. A few low notes rising and falling with the turning light. Before you could knock, the door opened. Warm air drifted out, carrying the scent of beeswax, sea salt, old paper, and tea. An old man stood inside. He was tall and thin, with silver hair, a weathered face, and eyes the clear grey blue of winter dawn. He wore a dark wool coat over a knitted sweater, and in one hand he held a brass lantern. He looked at you as if you were exactly on time. "There you are," he said. "Come in before the tide begins to remember itself." Chapter 2. The Keeper at the Door. The inside of the lighthouse was round, warm, and much larger than it should have been. From outside, the tower had looked narrow, just wide enough for a spiral staircase and perhaps a few small rooms. But inside, the circular chamber at the base opened around you like the heart of an old house. There was a stone fireplace along one wall, where blue and gold flames burned without smoke. There were shelves of books, tide journals, jars of sea glass, coils of rope, brass instruments, folded maps, and small wooden boxes labelled in careful handwriting. There was a long table with 2 cups of tea already waiting, and against the far wall, beneath a round window facing the harbour, there stood a green armchair with a wool blanket draped over its back. The old man closed the door behind you. "I am Elias Vale," he said, "keeper of this light, when there is light to keep." You introduced yourself, though your voice came out softer than you expected. In that room, even ordinary words felt like they should be handled gently. Elias hung the lantern on a hook beside the door and nodded toward the table. "Tea first," he said. "Stories behave better when offered tea." You sat across from him. The tea smelled of chamomile, honey, and something faintly floral that you could not name. It warmed your hands through the cup. For a while, Elias said nothing. He simply watched the fire. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that allowed everything inside you to slow down and find its place. At last, you asked the question that had followed you up the hill. "How can the lighthouse be here?" Elias smiled, not as if the question amused him, but as if he had been asked it many times and still liked the answer. Some places do not disappear all at once, he said. A house can be taken by weather. A tower can fall into the sea. A name can vanish from maps. But if enough people were comforted by a place, some part of it remains. He lifted his cup. This lighthouse was once called St. Elowin's Light. For 112 years it watched over the coast. Fishermen trusted it. Children counted its turns from their bedroom windows. Travelers saw it through snow and knew they were nearly home. He looked toward the ceiling where the faint hum of the lamp circled above. Then came a storm, a great one. The cliff broke beneath the tower, and by morning the lighthouse was gone, or nearly gone. You listened as the fire shifted softly. Nearly? You asked. Nearly, Elias said, because every full moon, when the sea is calm enough to remember and the tide is quiet enough to sleep, the lighthouse returns. Not for long, only until dawn, only for those who need its light. You looked down into your tea. Steam moved above it in slow, silver lines. Why me? You asked. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached across the table and turned your cup slightly until the moon outside the window reflected on its surface. People often think they are called because they are lost, he said, but that is not always true. Sometimes they are called because they have been moving too quickly to notice how tired they are. Sometimes because they have forgotten the shape of quiet. Sometimes because some small, gentle part of them is ready to come home. The words settled into the room. You could not say that you were lost. Not exactly. Your life, in the ordinary sense, was intact. There were mornings and tasks, messages and plans, small duties and familiar rooms. You knew where you lived. You knew what needed doing. But lately, there had been a sense of hurrying even when you were still. A feeling of always reaching for the next thing, the next answer, the next day, the next version of yourself that might finally be calm. And now, sitting in the impossible warmth of a lighthouse that only appeared at midnight, you felt how long it had been since you had allowed nothing to be required of you. Elias seemed to understand. He stood and crossed to one of the shelves. Come, he said. The light has turned 3 times since you arrived. We should climb before it turns 7. What happens then? He looked back with a gentle smile. The lighthouse begins its story. The staircase began behind a curved wooden door. It wound upward inside the tower, narrow and smooth, with a brass rail polished by invisible hands. The walls were lined with small framed pictures, ships in calm water, ships in storms, children waving from the harbor wall, summer picnics on the cliff, winter nights thick with snow, and the lighthouse standing over all of them, patient and bright. As you climbed, Elias walked ahead, carrying the lantern. The flame inside it did not flicker. At the first landing, there was a small room filled with coats, boots, and folded blankets. For those who arrive cold, Elias said. At the second landing, there was a room full of charts. Maps of the coastline covered every wall. Some were drawn in ink, some were painted in pale watercolors. Some showed islands you recognized, and others showed places that could not possibly exist. The orchard of lanterns, the lake of soft rain, the valley of unwound clocks, the forest where birds dream in winter. You paused before one map that showed Greyhaven itself, drawn in delicate lines of silver. But beside the harbour, on the hillside above the village, there was the lighthouse. This map was made yesterday, Elias said, but the lighthouse wasn't here yesterday. Not in the usual way, he replied. At the third landing, you found a kitchen. A kettle steamed on a small stove. A loaf of bread rested on a board. Jars of jam lined the shelf, each one labelled with a season instead of a fruit. Spring morning, late summer, first snow, the quiet after rain. You looked at Elias, and he shrugged as if this were perfectly ordinary. The lighthouse keeps what comforts it, he said. At the fourth landing, there was a library, not a large one, but deep and warm, with books built into the curved walls and a narrow couch beneath a round window. Some books had titles embossed in gold, others had no titles at all. A few seemed to be breathing very slowly, their covers rising and falling as if dreaming. Elias stopped there and took one book from the shelf. Its cover was blue, worn smooth at the corners. He handed it to you. On the front, in silver letters, was written, "The names of lights that guided someone home." You opened it. The pages were filled with names. Candle in a kitchen window, lamp beside a hospital bed, phone screen at 2:13 a.m., stars over a highway, fireflies in July, porch light left on, a lighthouse that only appeared at midnight. You closed the book gently. "Every light counts," Elias said, "especially the small ones." Then he continued up the stairs. The higher you climbed, the quieter the world below became. The inn, the harbour, the village, even the sea seemed to soften and fall away. There was only the round wall, the brass rail, Elias's lantern, and the steady turning hum from above. At last you reached the top. Elias opened a heavy iron door. Warm gold spilled down the stairs, and you stepped into the lantern room. Chapter 3. The Lantern Room. The lantern room was made almost entirely of glass. The night surrounded it on every side. The low, Greyhaven curved around the harbour, every cottage roof silver with snow. The inn looked small and dear, its windows glowing like sleepy eyes. The sea spread out beyond the breakwater, black and smooth beneath the full moon. And far away on the horizon, stars gathered in quiet clusters. At the centre of the room stood the light. It was not large, not in the way you expected. There was no roaring flame, no blinding blaze. Instead, a single golden lamp burned inside a great crystal lens made of rings and prisms and curved glass that caught the flame and multiplied it into something vast. The lens turned slowly on its brass base. With each turn, the light gathered itself, focused, and swept out across the sea. Gold across water. Gold across snow, gold across sleeping rooftops. Turn, glow, fade. Turn, glow, fade. It was the rhythm of being watched over. Elias crossed to the lens and rested one hand lightly on the brass rail around it. When the lighthouse returns, he said, the lamp must be tended. Not because ships need it, not tonight. The sea is calm, the harbor is safe, but there are other kinds of weather. You stood beside him and looked out over Greyhaven. Inside people? You asked. He nodded. Inside people. The light turned again. For a moment, the village glowed, and in that glow, something strange happened. The rooftops and streets remained where they were, but above them, faint as breath on glass, appeared tiny scenes. A baker asleep at her kitchen table, her head resting beside a bowl of dough, a half-written letter near her elbow. A child in a blue room, one hand open on the pillow, dreaming of ships with lanterns instead of sails. An old fisherman sitting awake by a dark window, looking at the sea and remembering the voice of someone he had loved. The light passed, the scenes faded. The lighthouse remembers what the village carries, Elias said. Not to expose it, not to judge, only to soften what has grown heavy. He moved to a small cabinet and opened the drawer. Inside were folded cloths, a bottle of clear oil, and a small brush with a silver handle. Would you like to help? You nodded. He gave you one of the cloths. It was softer than linen, almost weightless. The lens collects more than dust, he explained. It gathers worries, especially the quiet kind. The kind people set aside all day and find waiting for them at night. You looked at the glass. Now that you were closer, you could see faint marks on the surface. Not fingerprints, not frost. Little cloudy places, as if the lens had breathed in too much sadness. Together, you and Elias began to clean. You moved slowly around the lens, wiping each curved panel with careful circles. The work was simple, gentle, almost meditative. Cloth over glass, a breath, a turn of the lamp. Cloth over glass, a breath, a turn of the lamp. With each small motion, the light grew clearer, not brighter exactly, kinder. The golden beam no longer cut through the dark. It moved through it the way a hand moves over a blanket, smoothing it. There is a story in every beam, Elias said after a while. What story is this one telling? He smiled. That depends on where it falls. The light turned toward the sea. For a moment, the water below the cliff was not water at all, but a long, dark hallway lined with doors. Behind each door was a soft glow. Some glows were blue, some amber, some silver. One was green, like summer under leaves. Those are places people dream of when they need rest, Elias said. Some are remembered, Some are imagined, some are waiting to be found. The beam moved on. The hallway vanished. You cleaned another section of glass. A faint cloudiness lifted from it and dissolved into the air like mist. As it did, you heard a sound, a very small one, a sigh. Not yours, not Elias's. Somewhere below, in the village, someone who had been restless turned over in bed and settled more deeply into sleep. Does the lighthouse do that? You asked. Sometimes, Elias said, when people are ready. The light cannot take anything away by force. It only reminds the heart that it may put something down. Those words stayed with you. It only reminds the heart that it may put something down. You thought of all the invisible things people carried, old conversations replayed in the dark, plans that never rested, kind words left unsaid, small disappointments folded and refolded until they felt larger than they were. The quiet pressure to become someone else by morning. And you imagined the lighthouse turning above all of it, not fixing, not forcing, only offering its warm gold light again and again. After a long while, the lens was clear. Elias stepped back and looked pleased. There, he said, now it can show you the map. What map? He pointed to the floor. At first you saw only dark wood and the circular brass track on which the lens turned. Then the light passed overhead and lines appeared beneath your feet. They glowed silver. They curved outward from the lamp, crossing the floor in delicate paths, branching and rejoining like rivers. Islands appeared, forests, mountains, a lake shaped like a crescent, a railway line running through rain, a bookshop at the end of a narrow lane, a village beneath the snow. And at the center of it all, the lighthouse. Elias lowered himself carefully into a wooden chair beside the wall. This, he said, is the moon map. Chapter 4. The Moon Map. The map covered the entire floor of the lantern room. It had not been painted there, at least not in any ordinary way. The lines appeared only when the lighthouse beam passed over them. Silver for roads, blue for rivers, gold for places of shelter, a soft green for forests, and a pearl white glow wherever snow was falling. You stepped carefully, though Elias assured you the map would not mind. At the northern edge there was a forest of dark pines, each tree tipped with moonlight. A label appeared beside it in small script. The Forest of Quiet Lanterns. To the west, a train curved through a valley under rain. The midnight line to moonfall. Near the bottom, a village rested beside a canal, its bridges arched and lit by little lamps. The town of returning dreams. And near the centre, not far from Greyhaven, was the lighthouse itself, St. Elowin's Light. You noticed that the map was moving, not quickly, not like a normal map where everything is fixed and named and finished. This map breathed. Clouds drifted over mountains, Tiny waves moved against painted shores. Windows brightened and dimmed in faraway cottages. A small ferry crossed a blue-black bay and left a silver thread behind it. "Are these real places?" you asked. Elias considered this. "As real as a place needs to be," he said. "Some can be reached by road, some by memory, some only by sleep." He stood again and brought a small brass pointer from the wall. "The lighthouse is not simply a building," he said. "It is also a crossing point. When it appears, it can see every quiet place that has ever helped someone rest." He touched the pointer to a little blue valley. The map brightened there, and suddenly the air around you filled with the soft sound of rain on a train roof. For a moment you saw it, a midnight train moving through fields of silver rain, its windows warm, its passengers asleep beneath folded coats and wool scarves. Then Elias touched another place. A library appeared, hidden beneath the moon, with shelves that curved into darkness and lamps that glowed like captured stars. Another touch. A cottage in the snow, with a kettle on the stove and a chair beside a window. Another. A harbour bookshop where rain slid down the glass and every book on the shelves waited patiently for the right reader. You watched, quietly amazed. Each place felt different, but all of them had the same gentle center. They were places where nothing rushed, places where no one demanded an answer, places where warmth gathered against the dark. "Why show me this?" you asked. Elias lowered the pointer. For the first time since you had arrived, his expression grew a little sad. Not frighteningly sad, only tender, the way old things sometimes are when they remember how much time has passed. "Because the lighthouse is fading," he said. The lamp turned. Gold moved across his face. "Every year, fewer people remember St. Eloin's light. Fewer children count its beam from their windows. Fewer sailors tell stories of it in harbour rooms. The village still knows, in a way, but knowing and remembering are not always the same." He looked out through the glass toward Greyhaven. "Places need to be remembered with care, not loudly, not forever by everyone, but by someone. A place that has offered shelter should not vanish without being thanked." You looked down at the map. The lighthouse glowed softly at its center. "What happens if it fades completely?" "Then it rests," Elias said, "and perhaps that is not a tragedy. All things rest eventually, even lights." He smiled faintly. "But before it rests, there is one final turn it wishes to make, one final story it wishes to tell." You knew, before he said it, that this was why you had been called. Not because you were special in any grand way, not because you had been chosen for danger or greatness, but because you had arrived on a moon night, and the beam had turned toward your window, and some quiet part of you had answered. "What do I need to do?" you asked. Elias crossed to a wooden cabinet beneath the northern window. The cabinet was small, with brass hinges shaped like shells. He unlocked it with a key he wore around his neck. Inside was a box. Inside the box was a small, crescent-shaped piece of glass. It looked like a fragment from the moon. Elias lifted it carefully. "This is the last prism," he said. The glass glowed softly in his hand. "The lamp can turn without it. It can shine without it. But to tell its final story, the lens must be whole." He placed the prism in your palm. It was warm and impossibly light. "Where does it go?" you asked. Elias pointed to the lens. Near its center, among all the curved crystal rings, there was a small, empty place, shaped exactly like the crescent in your hand. "There," he said. "But the prism will not fit until it remembers why it shines." You held the small glass piece carefully. It did not look broken. It looked unfinished. Inside it, faint images moved. A child holding a lantern, a stormy sea, a woman waving from a pier, a room with a round window, a cup of tea, snow on a harbor road, your own hands holding the prism beneath the full moon. "How does it remember?" you asked. Elias's voice became very gentle. "You carry it through the lighthouse. Every room will offer it something, a sound, a memory, a little warmth. When it is ready, it will become clear. And then the light will tell the village what it came to say." You looked at the prism. It rested in your palm like a sleeping thing. The lighthouse hummed softly around you. Below, Greyhaven slept in the snow, and above, the moon waited patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. Chapter 5. Rooms of the Returning Light. You and Elias began the descent. This time you walked more slowly, carrying the crescent prism in both hands. The lamp continued to turn above you, and with every turn the stairwell filled briefly with gold before returning to shadow. Gold, shadow, gold, shadow. A rhythm like breathing. At the first landing below the lantern room, you returned to the little library. The room seemed warmer than before. The books were awake now, though not in a noisy way. Their pages rustled softly on the shelves, as if adjusting themselves in sleep. Elias touched the door frame. "This room keeps remembered words," he said. "Not famous words necessarily, not perfect ones, only words that gave shelter." The crescent prism glowed faintly in your hands. You stepped inside. A blue book slid gently from the shelf and opened on the table. The page was blank. Then ink began to appear. "Do you want more tea?" "Drive safely. I saved you the last piece. Text me when you get home. You can try again tomorrow. I am proud of you. I left the light on." The words were ordinary. So ordinary that any one of them might have passed unnoticed in the moment it was spoken. But here, in the little library inside a lighthouse that only appeared at midnight, they seemed precious. You felt the prism grow warmer. Inside it, a small cloudiness cleared. "Small kindnesses are often the first lights people forget," Elias said. "But the heart remembers them, even when the mind misplaces them." You thought of messages you had received and barely answered, meals placed in front of you, doors held open, someone waiting while you found the right words, a familiar voice asking if you were all right. Not grand rescues, just lights, small lights, enough to see the next step. The prism brightened. When you looked inside it now, you saw a cottage window glowing across a snowy field. It has taken the first memory, Elias said. He closed the blue book gently, and you continued downward. The next landing was the kitchen. The kettle still steamed. The bread was still warm. The jars labelled with seasons glowed faintly on the shelf. This room keeps nourishment, Elias said. The kinds that do not always look important until later. He took down a jar labelled First Snow and spread a little of its pale golden jam onto a slice of bread. He offered it to you on a small blue plate. The taste was difficult to describe. Sweet, but not too sweet. Cold air at the edge of the tongue. Warmth after that. Like coming inside after a long walk. Like dry socks. Like a blanket warmed by the fire. Like the first quiet moment after a hard day. The prism pulsed once. A second cloudy place cleared. Inside it, the cottage window became brighter, and beside it appeared a table set for two, though no one was sitting there yet. Elias poured tea into 2 cups and gave one to you. People think rest is only sleep, he said. But rest is also being fed without needing to earn it, being warm without needing to explain why you are cold, being welcomed without needing to perform gratitude perfectly. You held the tea close. The Lighthouse kitchen was small, but somehow it contained every safe kitchen you had ever known, every late-night snack, every cup placed quietly beside you, every meal eaten when you were too tired to speak. The prism warmed again. You continued downward. At the next landing, you entered the chart room. The maps on the walls had changed. Before, they had shown coastlines and impossible places. Now they showed routes, not just roads and rivers, but the routes people take through a life. Some were direct, most were not. Silver lines curved, doubled back, vanished, reappeared, crossed water, circled mountains, wandered through forests, and sometimes stopped for years before continuing. You stood before one map that had no labels. A single path began in the lower left corner and climbed toward the top right, but it did not travel in a straight line. It looped around lakes, entered fog, returned to the same little bridge 3 times, and paused beside a drawing of a tree. "This one seems lost," you said. Elias chuckled softly. "Most useful routes do while they are being walked." He lifted a brass compass from the table. Its needle did not point north. It turned slowly until it pointed toward the prism in your hands. "This room keeps patience," he said. "The patience to let a path be a path, even when it does not look efficient." You thought of all the ways you had measured yourself by speed, how quickly you understood, how quickly you improved, how quickly you became clear, confident, healed, finished. And here were maps that made no apology for wandering. The prism cleared further. Inside it, the cottage window and table shifted, revealing a path through snow leading toward the door. Footprints marked the path, not evenly, not perfectly, but steadily. "It is remembering," Elias said. His voice held relief. Down you went. At the next landing, the room of coats and blankets waited. It smelled of wool, cedar, rain, and winter air. Peg after peg held garments of every kind: fishermen's coats, children's scarves, long cloaks, mittens with patched thumbs, shawls, heavy socks, knitted caps, and one bright red scarf that seemed to glow softly in the corner. "This room keeps the memory of being protected," Elias said. He took the red scarf and folded it over your arms, around the prism. At once, the glass brightened. The scene inside it changed again. Now the cottage door opened. Warm light spilled over the snowy path. Someone inside had been expecting you. You could not see who. Maybe the prism did not need a face. Maybe shelter was sometimes only the feeling that somewhere, in some room, a place had been made for you. "Protection is not always dramatic," Elias said. "Sometimes it is a scarf, a roof, a closed door during a storm, a person standing quietly between you and the cold." The prism became almost clear. Only one cloudy place remained at its center. Elias looked at it carefully. "There is one more room," he said. "The room at the bottom?" He nodded. "The first room. The keeper's room." You followed him down the final turn of stairs. The base chamber of the lighthouse waited below, warm with firelight, lined with books and sea glass and old wooden boxes. But now it seemed changed. The fire burned lower. The shadows were softer. The round window looked out not onto the harbour, but onto the sea as it must have looked long ago, before the storm took the tower away. Through the glass you saw waves rising in moonlight. You saw rain, hard and silver. You saw the old lighthouse standing against it, and you saw Elias, younger then, climbing the stairs with a lantern in his hand. Chapter 6. The Storm Remembered. Gently, the room grew very still. The scene in the window moved like a memory, but softly, as if the lighthouse had decided not to frighten you with the full force of what had happened. There was a storm, a real one, the kind that bends trees, erases roads, and turns the sea into a field of white, rushing water. Rain struck the windows. Wind pressed itself against the stone. Somewhere below, waves broke hard against the cliff. But inside the lighthouse, the lamp kept turning. Young Elias moved quickly but calmly through the lantern room. His coat was wet. His hair was dark then, touched only slightly with grey. He checked the flame, cleaned the glass, tightened a brass fitting, and looked out into the storm. Far below, in the black water, a fishing boat struggled toward the harbour. Its lamp flickered. The lighthouse beam found it. Again, again, again. In the base room beside you, older Elias watched the memory through the round window. His face was peaceful, but his hands were folded tightly behind his back. "Was that the night?" you asked. He nodded. "The night the cliff fell." The memory continued. The fishing boat found the harbour mouth. The beam guided it between the rocks. On shore, villagers stood with lanterns along the pier, calling to one another through the rain. The boat reached safety, and then the cliff began to give way. The lighthouse trembled, the glass shook. Young Elias placed one hand on the lens and whispered something you could not hear. Then the memory slowed, the storm softened, the waves became white mist, the sound faded until there was only the low hum of the lamp. I thought, Elias said quietly, that a keeper's duty was to keep the light burning until the end. You looked at him. And did you? Yes, he said. The boat came home. The village was safe. The light did what it was made to do. He paused. But afterward, for a long time, I remembered only the falling, not the guiding. I remembered what was lost more clearly than what was saved. The crescent prism in your hands gave a faint, gentle warmth. Elias looked at it, and something in his expression softened. That, he said, is the final cloudiness. The light itself had forgotten its own kindness. You looked into the prism. At its center was the storm. Not loud now, not wild, only a small, dark swirl inside the glass. Around it were all the images it had gathered, the words of kindness, the warm kitchen, the patient maps, the scarf, the open cottage door. Together they surrounded the storm, not erasing it, holding it. You understood then. Some memories do not need to disappear in order to become gentle. Some losses remain part of the story, but they no longer have to be the whole story. Some storms, when held inside enough warmth, become only one chapter of a longer night. You cupped the prism carefully in both hands. The boat came home, you said. Elias looked at you. You said it again, softly. The boat came home. The prism brightened. The dark swirl inside it loosened. The cottage door opened wider. The snowy path shone. And inside the glass, the lighthouse appeared, standing whole beneath the moon. Elias exhaled. There it is, he whispered. There is the memory. For a moment, the room seemed full of quiet gratitude. Not celebration, not victory, something gentler than that. The feeling of a tired heart being told, after a very long time, that it had done enough. Elias lifted the brass lantern from its hook. It is ready, he said. We must return it to the lens. You followed him back up the stairs. This time, the lighthouse seemed to know. The books in the library rustled as you passed. The kettle in the kitchen gave a small, pleased sigh of steam. The maps in the chart room shimmered along their silver roots. The coats and blankets stirred gently, as if touched by a warm wind. And above, the lantern room glowed brighter with every step. By the time you reached the top, the lamp was turning very slowly, waiting. The empty crescent space in the lens shone softly. You approached it with care. Elias stood beside you, one hand resting on the brass rail. Place it gently, he said. You lifted the prism. For a moment it held the moonlight, the firelight, the lamplight, and the memory of every room you had passed through. Then you set it into the lens. It fit perfectly. Chapter 7. The Final Turn of the Light. At first, nothing happened. The prism sat quietly in its place. The lamp burned with its small golden flame. The sea lay still below. Then the lens began to turn, slowly, more slowly than before. Each ring of glass caught the light and passed it onward. Each prism, each curve, each polished surface gathered the flame and shaped it into a beam unlike any you had seen. It was not only gold now. There was silver in it, and blue, and a soft rose color, like dawn hidden inside midnight. The beam moved across the lantern room, across Elias's face, across your hands, across the moon map on the floor where every quiet place glowed in answer. Then it passed through the glass and out into the night. The light touched Greyhaven, and the village dreamed. You saw it all, not as an intruder, not as someone peering into private rooms, but as someone standing beneath a shared sky, watching kindness pass from window to window. The baker, asleep at her table, stirred and smiled. In her dream, the letter beside her was finished, folded, and sent. The child in the blue room sailed a ship made of lanterns across a sea so calm it reflected every star. The old fisherman by the window finally slept, and in his dream he stood once more on the pier with the person he had loved. They did not speak. They simply watched the moon on the water, and that was enough. A young woman in a cottage at the edge of the village dreamed of a garden in spring, though snow covered her roof. A man who had worried all evening about tomorrow dreamed of walking through a field where every path eventually led home. At the inn, the silver-haired woman behind the counter slept in her small room below the roof. In her dream, she was a girl again, counting the lighthouse beam with her brother from their bedroom window. 1, 2, 3. Safe. The light turned again. This time it moved beyond the village, across the harbor, across the sleeping boats, across the breakwater stones glazed with ice, out over the sea. And there, in the moonlit dark, you saw shapes appearing along the silver path. Not ships, memories. Every boat the lighthouse had guided, every sailor who had looked up through rain and seen its beam, every child who had waved at it from shore, every traveler who had reached Greyhaven because the light had told them where the coast began. They appeared only briefly, soft outlines in gold, a sail, a hand raised in thanks, a lantern, a face turned toward home. Then they faded back into the peaceful dark. Elias stood very still, the light reflected in his eyes. "It remembers," he said. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "It remembers all of it now." The lamp completed another turn. The beam rose higher than before, lifting from the sea into the sky. The clouds above the headland opened. Moonlight poured down, and the lighthouse sent its story upward. You could not hear it with your ears, but you felt it. A message made of warmth and snow and salt and flame. It said, "I was here. I watched the dark. I helped what I could. I may rest now." The words moved through you slowly. Not only for the lighthouse, for every part of life that tries quietly to do enough. For every small effort no one sees. For every day that ends without everything being fixed. For every heart that keeps turning its light, even when the weather is hard. I was here. I watched the dark. I helped what I could. I may rest now. Elias closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked truly tired. Not weary in a sad way, peacefully tired. The way someone looks when they have finally set down a lantern after a long walk. Will the lighthouse disappear? You asked. At dawn, he said, as it always does. Will it return? He looked at the lamp. Perhaps. Perhaps not in this shape. But light is rarely lost. It becomes other things. Windows, candles, street lamps, stars, stories. He smiled at you, especially stories. The two of you stood together in the lantern room while the beam made its final turns. Neither of you spoke. There was nothing more that needed to be explained. Below, Greyhaven slept more deeply than before. The sea remained calm, the moon shone bright and full, and the lighthouse, whole at last, kept watch over everything. Chapter 8. Before Dawn. After a while, Elias led you back downstairs. The lighthouse felt different now. Not empty, not sad, only complete. The rooms had quieted. The library books rested closed on their shelves. The maps in the chart room no longer shimmered so brightly. The kettle in the kitchen had stopped steaming, though the air still smelled faintly of tea. In the coat room, the red scarf hung neatly on its peg, its colour soft in the low light. In the base room, the fire burned low. Elias placed another log on it, and the flames rose just enough to warm the stones. Sit a moment, he said. You sat in the green armchair by the window. The wool blanket over its back was heavy and soft. You drew it around your shoulders. Elias moved about the room with the gentle routine of someone closing a house for the night. He returned a book to its shelf. He latched a small wooden box. He trimmed the wick of the brass lantern. He wiped the table where the teacups had left pale rings. Each movement was slow, unhurried, a kind of farewell, though he did not call it that. Through the round window, you could see the first faint paling of the sky beyond the sea. Not dawn yet, only the idea of dawn. A little softness at the edge of black. You should go before the tide wakes, Elias said. You looked toward the door. Part of you did not want to leave. The lighthouse was warm, the chair was comfortable, the fire was low and kind. Outside, the path down to the village waited in cold moonlight. But you understood. Some places are not meant to be held by staying. Some are held by remembering. Elias crossed to the shelf beside the door and took down a small object wrapped in blue cloth. He placed it in your hand. Inside was a brass bookmark shaped like a crescent moon. At its center, there was a tiny piece of glass, no larger than a raindrop. It caught the firelight and glowed. A small light, Elias said. For ordinary nights. You closed your fingers around it carefully. Thank you, you said. The words felt too small, but Elias nodded as though they were exactly the right size. At the door, you turned back. What should I tell people? About the lighthouse? You nodded. Elias thought for a moment. Tell them a story, he said. Not to convince them, not to prove anything, just to place a little light where someone might find it later. The lamp above made another slow turn. Gold passed down the stairwell and across the floor between you. And if they don't believe it? You asked. He smiled. Then let them sleep peacefully anyway. That is enough. You stepped outside. The snow had stopped completely. The world before dawn was blue and silver and still. The path down the cliff shone faintly beneath your feet. Behind you, the lighthouse stood tall against the fading stars, its lamp still turning, though more slowly now. You began to walk. One step, then another, then another. The cold air touched your face. The sea breathed below. The village waited at the foot of the hill, peaceful and dark. As you passed through the old iron gate, it swung closed behind you with a soft click. You looked back. The lighthouse remained, but its edges had begun to soften. The stone looked less solid, the windows less bright, the beam thinner, gentler, fading into the growing blue of morning. By the time you reached the first cottages, the sky had turned pale. A chimney released a line of smoke. A gull called once, far away, but even that sound seemed sleepy. The black cat appeared again on the stone wall near the candle shop. It watched you pass, blinked slowly, and tucked its paws beneath itself. At the harbour, the boats shifted with the waking tide. Ropes creaked. Water touched the pier in small, familiar sounds. The village was becoming ordinary again, but not less beautiful. Only ordinary in the way morning is ordinary. Quietly miraculous, if you are rested enough to notice. At the turning tide, the front door was unlocked. Inside, the common room smelled of coffee, toast, and fading firewood. The innkeeper stood behind the counter, placing clean cups on a tray. She looked up as you entered. For a moment, neither of you spoke. Then her eyes moved to your hand, where the edge of the brass crescent bookmark showed between your fingers. Her expression softened. So, she said, it had a story after all. You nodded. Yes. And did it tell you everything? You thought of the lighthouse, the prism, the storm, the final beam, Elias standing in the gold light. Then you thought of what he had said. Tell them a story, not to convince them, just to place a little light. Not everything, you said, but enough. The innkeeper smiled. Enough is often the best kind of story. She poured you a cup of coffee, then changed her mind and poured tea instead. For a moon night, she said. You carried it to the window beside the hearth. Outside, the headland was visible in the soft morning light. There was no lighthouse, only snow, low grass, and the pale edge of the cliff. No tower, no lamp, no door painted dark blue. And yet, when the sun rose higher and touched the snow, something flashed on the headland for just a moment. A little point of gold. Then it was gone. You went upstairs later, though you were not sure when. Room 7 was just as you had left it. The narrow bed, the wool blanket, the chair beside the round window, the writing desk with the jar of dried lavender. But the folded card was gone. In its place lay a single blank page. At the top, in blue ink, were the words, "The lighthouse that only appeared at midnight." Below that, nothing. The rest of the page waited. You sat at the desk. For a long while you listened to the village waking below. A door opening, a broom on a step, a kettle whistle, the soft complaint of a boat rope being untied. Ordinary sounds, small lights. Then you picked up the pen and you began. You wrote about the village first. Greyhaven under snow, the harbour lamps, the inn with its warm windows, the kind woman who knew about moon nights. You wrote about room 7 and the round window facing the sea. You wrote about the light appearing on the headland at midnight. You wrote about the path, the iron gate, the lighthouse door opening before you could knock. You wrote about Elias Vale, the tea, the staircase, the library of small kindnesses, the kitchen of warmth, the maps of patient roads, the room of coats and blankets, the storm that learned how to be held, the prism remembering, the final turn of the light. And when you reached the end, you did not write that the lighthouse vanished. Not exactly. Instead, you wrote, "By morning, the tower had become the story, and the story had become a light." When you finished, the room felt very still. You set down the pen. The brass crescent bookmark rested beside the page. For a moment, the tiny piece of glass at its center glowed softly. Then the glow faded. Not gone, only sleeping. You folded the page carefully and slipped the bookmark over its edge. Outside, the tide moved in. The village went about its morning, and far across the water, where moonlight had been only hours before, the sea shone pale beneath the winter sun. Chapter 9. A Light for Ordinary Nights. Years passed after that night, or perhaps only days. Stories are strange with time. Sometimes a single night becomes large enough to hold a whole season. Sometimes years become a few soft images, a window, a cup, a path, a voice saying that enough is enough. You returned to your life. The roads became busy again, messages arrived, plans changed. Weather turned from winter to spring, then summer, then autumn, then winter once more. But some nights, when the world grew too loud or your thoughts moved too quickly, you would find the brass crescent bookmark tucked inside a book or resting near your bed. You would hold it in your palm, and for a moment you would remember the lighthouse. Not sharply, not like a task. Gently. you would remember that some paths wander and still arrive, that small kindnesses count, that warmth does not need to be earned, that protection is sometimes only a scarf, a roof, a door closed against the cold, that even storms can become one chapter inside a larger story, and that light is rarely lost. It becomes other things: windows, candles, street lamps, stars, stories. One winter evening, long after your visit to Greyhaven, you find yourself walking through a different town in a different kind of snow. This town had no harbour, no cliff, no inn called the Turning Tide, only narrow streets, bare trees, and yellow lamps glowing through the early dark. You had been carrying a tiredness that day, not a dramatic one, not the kind anyone would notice from the outside, just the ordinary heaviness that can gather quietly over time, the weight of too many unfinished thoughts, too many small decisions, too much noise. You stopped beneath a street lamp and watched snowflakes pass through its glow. For a moment, they looked exactly like the snow outside room 7. Slow, silver, weightless. You reached into your pocket and found the brass bookmark there, though you did not remember bringing it. The tiny glass at its center was warm. Across the street, a child was trying to help an older man carry a paper bag that was nearly too large for both of them. The bag split slightly near the bottom, and an orange rolled into the snow. You picked it up and carried it back to them. The old man smiled. The child laughed. "Thank you," they said. It was nothing, a small thing. But as you continued walking, the bookmark glowed once in your pocket. A small light, an ordinary light, enough to see the next step. You began to understand that this was how the lighthouse remained. Not by standing forever on the cliff, not by turning its beam across the same sea, but by becoming part of the little ways people guided one another. A text sent at the right time, a lamp left on, a story told softly, a cup of tea offered without question, a path cleared through snow, a voice saying with kindness, "You may rest now. You may rest now." And perhaps, somewhere beyond ordinary maps, Elias Vale knew. Perhaps the keeper's room was quiet now. Perhaps the lantern room was dark. Perhaps the lighthouse had settled into a rest deeper than sleep. Its stones held gently by the sea, its name carried in stories, its final light becoming 1,000 smaller lights scattered through the world. Or perhaps, on certain full moon nights, when the tide slept and the sea was calm, it still appeared. A tower of white stone, a golden lamp, a path of light across the water. And perhaps someone in room 7 would wake at midnight, look out of the round window and feel, without fear, that they had been invited. If they followed the path, They might find the old iron gate. They might climb the headland under silver snow. They might stand before the dark blue door and hear, faintly, the memory of music inside the stone. And before they could knock, the door might open. Warm air might drift out, carrying the scent of beeswax, sea salt, old paper, and tea. And someone kind might say, "There you are. Come in before the tide begins to remember itself." Or maybe the lighthouse appears differently now. Maybe for one person, it is not a tower at all, but a train with warm windows arriving through rain. For another, it is a hidden library beneath the moon. For another, a cottage at the edge of the forest. For another, a bookshop glowing at the end of a wet street. For another, simply a room where the phone is turned off, the blanket is warm, and the night no longer asks for anything. The shape does not matter as much as the feeling of being watched over, the feeling of finding your way back to quiet, the feeling of a light turning slowly in the dark, not to hurry you, not to demand anything of you, but simply to say, "Here, here is the shore, here is the harbor, here is a place where you can rest." And so, as this story begins to soften toward its end, imagine that light now, not far away, not unreachable, just a warm, gentle glow somewhere inside the night. It turns slowly, slowly, across the water, across the snow, across the windows of a sleeping village, across the small rooms where people are letting go of the day, across your own quiet place, wherever you are. It does not ask you to be different. It does not ask you to solve everything before morning. It does not ask you to carry every thought to its proper ending. It only moves softly through the dark, and when it reaches you, it brings the memory of warm rooms, patient maps, small kindnesses, gentle roads, and the old keeper who learned, at last, that the boat came home. The boat came home. The light did what it could. The story was enough. And now, the night is quiet. Closing. Sleep fade. Greyhaven sleeps beneath the moon. The cottages are warm. The harbour is still. The boats rest against their ropes. Snow lies softly on the rooftops. The inn windows glow low and golden. Room 7 is peaceful beneath the sloping roof. The round window looks out toward the headland, and far away where the cliff meets the sky, a lighthouse turns its lamp across the water. Slowly, softly, again and again. The light moves over the sea. The sea breathes in and out, in and out. The snow drifts down, the fire settles, the village dreams. There is nothing more to do tonight, nothing more to finish. The story has found its harbor. The light has made its final turn, and you may rest now. You may rest now. Let the sound of the ocean stay with you. Let the snow fall softly in the dark. Let the warm windows of Greyhaven glow somewhere in the distance. And if your thoughts wander, let them wander gently. They do not need to arrive anywhere quickly. They are only walking the moonlit path, one step, then another, then another. The lighthouse is still there. The door is closed. The lamp is warm. The keeper has set down his lantern, and all across the quiet sea the light becomes softer and softer until it is not something you see, but something you feel. A little warmth, a little peace, a small light for ordinary nights. Sleep well, and when you are ready, let the moonlight carry you into dreams.